This city wasn't supposed to exist. No police, no laws, no government control. And yet, more than 30,000 people lived there, packed inside a few blocks of concrete so dense that sunlight almost never touched the ground. People called it the most crowded place on Earth. But the craziest part? It existed in the middle of one of the richest cities in the world. Welcome to Kowloon Walled City, a real place that looked more like a cyberpunk nightmare than reality. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why some people actually loved living there, and why the modern world may be slowly turning into Kowloon all over again. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to Hong Kong. Today, Hong Kong is part of China, but for a long time, it was controlled by Britain. After the Opium Wars, Britain forced China to lease Hong Kong for 99 years. But China demanded one strange condition. A tiny piece of land inside Hong Kong would remain under Chinese control. Just a few acres, barely noticeable on a map. Chinese officials were supposed to stay there and monitor the British. But there was one problem. China at the time was weak, unstable, and falling apart internally. Eventually, the officials abandoned the area completely, and suddenly this tiny piece of land became something incredibly unusual. A place that technically belonged to China, inside a British city, but controlled by nobody. Then World War II began. Japan invaded Hong Kong. The city was devastated. And when the war finally ended, Britain returned and took back control of Hong Kong. Except for this one tiny area. Nobody wanted political problems. Nobody wanted conflict with China, so both sides basically ignored it. And that's when everything changed. At the same time, China was collapsing into civil war. Millions of refugees fled the country. Some escaped into Hong Kong, searching for safety, work, and survival. And there, hidden inside the city, they found this forgotten zone. A place with almost no laws, no inspections, no real government. So people started moving in, first hundreds, then thousands. Buildings began stacking on top of each other, apartment over apartment, hallway over hallway, pipes, wires, metal cages, leaking walls. Nobody planned anything. Nobody asked permission. If there was empty space, someone built on it. And slowly, this chaotic settlement transformed into something unbelievable. Kowloon Walled City. Imagine taking an entire city and crushing it into a few city blocks. That was Kowloon. The buildings became so tightly packed that some streets were less than a meter wide. In many places, sunlight never reached the ground. Children played under flickering neon lights. Water dripped constantly from rusted pipes overhead. The air smelled like noodles, smoke, mold, sweat, gasoline, and garbage all mixed together. People who entered Kowloon for the first time often got lost immediately. The city looked alive, like a giant machine made from concrete and cables. But somehow, it worked. Thousands of people survived there every single day. Inside Kowloon, there were shops, factories, dentists, restaurants, schools, clinics, and apartments. Entire lives happened inside those walls. And because almost nobody controlled the city, people could open businesses without licenses or regulations. That made Kowloon extremely attractive for people who had nowhere else to go. Illegal immigrants, workers without documents, people too poor to afford real Hong Kong housing. Even small entrepreneurs came there because rent was cheap and rules barely existed. You could literally turn your tiny apartment into a factory overnight. Some families made noodles, others produced candy, dumplings, or sauces. And many of those products were secretly sold across Hong Kong. But of course, where laws disappear, crime moves in fast. Kowloon became famous for underground businesses, illegal gambling, drug labs, brothels, unlicensed clinics. At one point, criminal organizations known as the Triads controlled large parts of the city, and the police, they barely entered. Officers would occasionally rush inside for quick raids, 15 minutes, grab a few suspects, confiscate something, leave immediately. because controlling Kowloon was nearly impossible. The city was basically a maze, hundreds of dark corridors, thousands of tiny apartments, countless hidden staircases. Even maps barely helped. And despite all this, many residents say they actually loved living there. That sounds insane, but think about it. For many people, Kowloon represented freedom. No impossible paperwork, no expensive licenses, no questions about your past. If you could survive there, you could build a life. Meanwhile, outside Kowloon, Hong Kong was becoming one of the richest cities on earth. And that created a strange contrast. One of the wealthiest places in human history, standing right next to one of the most chaotic places ever built. But eventually, the situation became too dangerous to ignore. By the 1980s, Britain and China were negotiating Hong Kong's future. And suddenly, Kowloon became an international embarrassment. The decision was simple: destroy it. The government announced that Kowloon Walled City would be demolished. Residents received compensation, but there was a problem. Housing prices in Hong Kong were already becoming insane. The money many residents received wasn't enough to buy even a small apartment. And honestly, this is where the story becomes terrifying. Because Kowloon may be gone, but the reason it existed never disappeared. Modern Hong Kong has some of the most expensive housing prices on earth. Some apartments are so small that people can't even stand upright inside them. Tiny metal cages, windowless rooms, shared bathrooms, entire families living in spaces smaller than parking spots, and people still pay massive amounts of money to live there. Why? Because salaries are high, opportunities are everywhere, and people are desperate to stay close to economic centers. One woman living in Hong Kong was asked where she sees herself in 10 years. Her answer shocked the internet. Probably dead by then. That's how hopeless the housing situation feels for many people. And it gets even crazier. In Hong Kong, even cemetery space is so expensive that graves are sometimes rented temporarily. When the lease expires, remains are removed so the space can be reused. Imagine fighting for space even after death. At the same time, many luxury apartments sit completely empty. Nobody lives there. They exist purely as investments for wealthy owners. That's the real problem. Housing stopped being only shelter. It became a financial asset. And once that happens, prices begin spiraling upward faster and faster. The rich buy more property, prices rise, normal people get pushed out. And the cycle repeats. There's even an economic measurement for this called the Gini coefficient. It measures inequality. And across much of modern history, inequality has been increasing. Many young people today already believe they may never own homes, even in wealthy countries. And this is where the story of Kowloon suddenly becomes very modern. Because maybe Kowloon wasn't just some weird accident. Maybe it was a warning, a preview of what happens when cities become too expensive for normal people to survive in. But there may also be another future. Think about this. In the past, people had to physically move into giant cities to find good jobs. That's why places like Hong Kong exploded in population. But now, the internet changes everything. For the first time in history, millions of people can work remotely. You no longer need to live directly inside the world's richest cities to earn money from them. And that could completely reshape the future of housing. In a strange way, the internet may allow humanity to build a new kind of Kowloon. Not a physical one made of concrete and wires, but a digital version. A world where people live in cheaper places while still connecting to global economies online. Maybe that's the escape route. Because if housing prices continue rising forever, the old system simply stops working. Today, Kowloon Walled City no longer exists. A park stands there now. Clean paths, trees, silence. Almost nothing remains of the city that once terrified the world. But former residents still remember it, not just as a dangerous slum, but as a strange community, a place where people adapted together, survived together, built their own world inside the cracks of two collapsing systems. And honestly, that might be the most unsettling part of the entire story, because the conditions that created Kowloon are slowly appearing all over the modern world again.